All right, we are live. This is exciting. We have Sarwar Qureshi on with us. Thank you so much for being here, Sarwar.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Casey.
So Sarwar and I have had many conversations over the last few months. Uh, well, actually, we connected quite a bit before the last few months, but even more over the last few months for obvious reasons. Sarwar is a CPA, chartered professional accountant, working specifically with small business owners to help them navigate the complexities of their numbers and taxes. Previously, he worked at a mid-sized firm here in Ottawa, but he's currently a partner at a small boutique firm that really focuses on that small business portion. He's also a professor at Algonquin College, which I don't know how that's working. I guess now summer, but that has obviously changed as well. So once again, Sour, we got a ton to talk about, and uh, let's just start there. there's so many things that we can talk about, but let's start with a little bit about your background and how you got into CPA. Like, is this something that's been in your family? Were you just generally interested in taxes and numbers, and just did it come naturally? Like, what's your story to get from where you were to where you are now?
Yeah, no, thank you for that introduction, Casey. And I would say it definitely runs in the family, runs in the blood. A lot of times people pick up something from their parents' workplace, and my dad was and is he's semi-retired now, but he was an office manager and accountant for a small construction company in Ottawa. And I used to see him do taxes and personal taxes, corporate taxes, bookkeeping, things like that. He would also do scheduling and a couple other office manager type tasks for that company. And I kind of grew up with it. So when I got to high school, I thought, hey, let's give it a try. The high school I attended offered a couple introductory classes to accounting. They went over well for me. And I thought, let's just roll with it. And that kind of turned into taking accounting at the University of Ottawa, which then turned into doing co-op at an accounting firm and getting my CPA designation and kind of rolling along with it. And you might hear my kids in the back. They might be making a little bit of noise, and that's perfectly normal.
Yeah, that's the new normal. That's for sure. You might see my little guy running across the doors behind me too, right? So,
Yeah, I'm,
uh,
I'm I'm with you. I got two of them, and I know I've met your Sullivan, right? I've met Sullivan before
yeah,
as well.
he actually just grabbed. You had given me that little Volkswagen bus, right? And I brought that back from the office. I was sitting over there, and he goes, "Oh, there's a new toy over here," and he took it. I'm like, "There you go, new toy, buddy." There. So thanks
Perfect,
to Sarwell.
perfect.
So why small businesses? There's at this point you're focusing on small businesses, which I'm obviously grateful for. But was there something that pulled you towards the small business side versus maybe going towards working with a larger firm or larger businesses?
Yeah, like when I first started working in that co-op role while I was at the University of Ottawa, and I was at that firm for about 7 or 8 years thereafter, that was a lot bigger companies. So we were working with, companies that were easily over 100 people, multiple offices, multiple locations,
Mm.
sometimes projects across Canada or across Ontario, things like that. And while I enjoyed working with those types of clients and learned a lot from that environment, I kind of had this very personal touch with a lot of my friends that I was meeting who were also starting businesses at that time. And a lot of them were, you know, maybe they were a carpenter in a construction company and they wanted to start their own carpentry business. Maybe they were a foreman and they wanted to kind of start off some project management services. So as those people kind of were doing their thing and I was talking to them, I thought, hey, I wish I could do business with you. And inevitably, a couple of those people were interested and we chatted. It just wasn't the right fit because in accounting, probably like in construction, you kind of have this niche clientele that you service. So when you're in that organization servicing bigger clients, that's kind of what you're good at and what fits best. And by all means, they were a great fit for those clients. So I kind of thought, hey, I'm kind of torn. I really want to work with my friends. I knew you at that time too, Casey. I knew you back when I was like over 5 years ago. So I thought, hey, if I want to be able to work with more of these types of people that I know on a personal level, and I find with those smaller businesses, you're dealing with the owner directly. There's no CFO in between. There's no controller in between. You're kind of, straight line of communication with the owner, making those decisions. And you, me as the accountant, act as the virtual CFO or act as that virtual financial help. So I kind of moved into a role where we're working with those companies that I would say are I would say on the bigger side, like 50 to 100 people on the bigger side. There's obviously smaller than that as well. And if they don't have a full-time CFO finance person, I get to be it. And that for me is really exciting.
Yeah, no, it's been a huge help. We had some interesting, some bad advice before we started working with you. I should have hired you 5 years ago. But anyways, we'll save that story for another day. But one of the things that you brought up, like there's these people starting up businesses, and we'll get into what's happening today and what the government's doing and what your thoughts are on that. And is there anything new we should know about that we, might be coming down the pipeline? But what would you recommend? Like if somebody, for example, there's the stuff that I know now, I wish I knew 10 years ago when I started, because I remember my electrician who's been in business 30 some odd years at this point. He's like, all the mistakes I made over my career, you made in like 5 years. So you're good now. So I made all my mistakes. The first, I'm like, all right, thanks. I think that's a compliment. But there were so many mistakes that I made just because I didn't know. Right. And I've kind of been, you pay for those mistakes, literally actually pay for like with money as a business sometimes, right? And then you learn from them. But some of those mistakes can put people out for good, right? It can divorce. Like there's so many. I always say like the biggest thing now that I know what I know is mindset. Like all the other stuff can be learned, but it's like 80% psychology and 20% mechanics, right? Knowing how to do the books or knowing how to swing the hammer or knowing how to like that's all stuff that you can learn. But the psychology when stuff hits the fan, to say it nicely, and how you manage that is a big part. But what would you recommend to people who are getting started?
Yeah, a couple things. So working with a lot of new business owners, we kind of see the gambit of, people who are looking for lots of advice versus people that are like, I'm going to do it myself. And, by all means, now that we have Google, everything's available to me. So I can kind of, see two ends of the spectrum. And for some things, I'm the same way. Like if I have a problem with something, the first maybe thing I'll do is type it into YouTube and see if there's a video on it, and then, not necessarily do it, but see if I could imagine myself doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to starting a business, it's no different, like you said, than a lot of other things that can be learned. I would say the most important part though is making sure you're learning from a reliable source. And, it's easy to type something into Google and then it's sometimes unknown if that advice that you're reading is dated, because rules change over time. If that advice is even Canadian, because there's a lot of US content and other content from other countries. So you want to make sure you're looking at the right stuff, relevant, current stuff. And if you can, there are some resources that you can access, like Ottawa has, for example, Invest Ottawa, which I used to be a volunteer at. And their goal is to provide some, entrepreneurship resources for people starting a business. And some of those resources are free. So I can appreciate, if you're trying to be mindful of your budget and just do some homework, that's maybe where you want to start. And then if you are going into business, starting something up, finding the right professional advisors is important. And it doesn't have to be expensive. Sometimes people think like, I'm going to get a lawyer and I have to write a big check. No, different lawyers work differently. And some of them have that startup friendly mentality in mind, where they might have some kind of package where instead of getting one-on-one time with them, maybe you get access to some videos or a library of content that's available on a cost-effective basis, because they're able to use that content for other people. Same thing goes for accountants. Instead of getting a one-on-one time, they might have something similar. So some of the stuff we can then, if people then reach out to us, we can train them on and get them started on the right foot. Because I just met with a client, actually, you might appreciate this yourself being in construction. They've been around for a while. It's a family business, but they're stuck doing everything in paper. So even though it's not new, which is your question, they still have the same need for, like, if they were a new client, I would be showing them the same things. I'd be showing them, here's the electronic way of doing stuff. It's not the old, you get an invoice, put into a folder, give it to another guy who's got to include that invoice on their billing to the customer, who's then got to put that invoice back into the folder to get it paid. And then, write the check and then file that invoice into another folder now that it's been paid. Like, those are so many steps that, if you're getting lots of invoices, it's crazy. So now I'm treating them like a new client where I got to walk you through the processes. And once they're in place, you can still do it yourself. It's not like you're going to be paying me an arm and a leg forever. It's, we get it in place, and some of that stuff is now something that you can look after and run with.
Yeah. One of the things I've realized too is that like, there's so many apps out there, there's so many programs, right? There's so many things to make businesses and people more efficient. It's easy to get lost in the technology sometime, but if you use it right, the cost of that technology can often save you way more money than what you're paying for it, right? So one of the examples I have is like when we went to uh, time clocking through smartphones, our payroll actually went down, right? Because people weren't rounding up, and right, like so that paid for some of that stuff. And we actually, because of how we do our contracts and everything's cost like how we do it, we had to do that now anyways, and that's like it's to the minute now. But it was interesting to see how that worked. And then if you think about even payments, like, yeah, you got to pay to order checks, but then the amount of time that it takes to like print a check and then sign it and pay for the stamp and get it in mail, like when you factor all that in, if you're paying somebody to do it, even if you're doing it yourself, what's your time worth?
Yeah.
Right. So that's always a good exercise to go through. Obviously, you're trying to keep expenses down, especially now during these times. But at the same time, you want to focus on generating income as well, like working on those income generating activities. And that's why my brother Chad and I are kind of good. Like he's very much about refining and getting it better. I'm like, all right, I'll go this way. I'm going to keep sprinting, right? So can you just pick up the stuff that I left behind?
Yeah.
So, sorry, did you want to add something to that?
No, I'm in agreement that, you got to be efficient about things, and whether that's cost efficient and doing it yourself, or even sometimes getting someone else to do it can be efficient. It's just a matter of going through what's the best process solution for this. So whether that ultimate outcome, once you've done that analysis, is doing it yourself, having someone else do it, a hybrid, it's just spending a little bit of time on your workflow. And that's kind of, people might not appreciate as an accountant. They think like, I'm just all about numbers. Well, the numbers, if they're going to be good, need to start at a good workflow entry system, data entry level. So in order to get me good numbers, I got to dig down into a little bit in terms of like, what's your process? Sometimes when I work with contractors, they're like, I'm too busy to bill. And I just like, go like, what? You're too busy to bill? Like, how are you going to get paid on time if you don't bill properly? And they're like, I'm issuing bills for like 4 months ago now. And I'm like, that makes no sense. Those customers are, they're not keeping you top of mind. They're gonna now, if they take 30 to 60 days to pay you, you're getting paid like 6 months after you completed the job. Like things like that, when I hear them, kind of to me speak to your process and your workflow. So I wanna tackle that and make sure that's good for anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the current state. Just in general, like obviously this isn't a new thing. It's been a few months at this point. And we know kind of for the most part what's out there. There's CERB for people who are working. There's the wage subsidy, and then there's the rents. What's the SECRA for the commercial real estate? And what's your just general thoughts on how things rolled out and how the Canadian government's been handling everything?
I have like a pro and con, like there's a good and a bad to everything. And the good for some of these programs was the efficiency. Like they rolled them out quick. They knew people needed money. They knew people didn't have time for, lots of paperwork and then reviewing the paperwork and getting back to them, months later with a yes or a no. Some of these processes I've heard, people applying for the wage subsidy within 5 days, they have their money deposited into their account. So I'm a big fan of that. The efficiency and the speed at which the programs rolled out to give people hope that money's coming, and then the speed at which the money came once they were able to apply, I'm a big fan of. The stuff that kind of bothered me a little bit is some of the administration side, in terms of some of the programs have a big undertaking to qualify, and sometimes that qualification is entirely on the individual or the business owner, and maybe in some cases like with the rent program with the landlord. So it kind of created this system, like if we speak to the rent program specifically, where you could be the tenant and the business owner that's in trouble, but if your landlord's not on board, you're kind of like, a little up the creek without a paddle. It's like, well, if they're not on board, like I can't do anything. I'm the one that's hurting here. I'm the one that wants to take advantage, and I need to. And the landlord, for their own reasons, which, may or may not be valid, are saying we're not going to participate. So now it creates this, frustration of like, what do I do now? There's a program that I could take advantage of, but I'm being excluded based on eligibility. So that part, in terms of the way that the administration was laid out, even like the factors or the qualification, like you're down 70%, you qualify, you're down 65%, you don't. Well, 65% hurts, like I'm down 65% because I tried to stay open in some kind of, makeshift capacity and do some stuff to get by. And by the time the program got released, I didn't know any better at the time. Now I don't qualify. Whereas if you had told me at the beginning, if you go down 70%, you qualify. Well, maybe I would have structured my affairs differently, and tried to qualify or made sure I
Right.
qualified because that to me was worth more than that extra little bit of revenue I made. So some of that stuff was a little frustrating. And, sometimes people, I just had a meeting with a dentist last week that was like a really, difficult situation this is for the wage subsidy program in terms of how that kind of plays out in their specific case. But once again, they didn't know at that time, and they did what they had to do at that time. And now the program doesn't work for them. And a lot of these programs are black and white. There's no like gray area where I could get part of it or I could still qualify. There's no person you can talk to. It's a very black and white application process. So that part's been the tough part.
Yeah, no, I can definitely, because I've kind of been involved with a couple businesses with, we have our businesses, which has worked well because we've been in business for a while and we could qualify for some of the stuff. But then my wife's business and the number company, we were doing some other stuff. Like it's not been nearly as easy, right? It's even with the new SEBA loan, like the new requirements, that's not even that great. You have to like apply to the bank and then upload through their website, but then there's finally got responses and they're saying, well, this document isn't good because we couldn't read it, but then you actually have to upload all the documents again. I'm like, I don't even remember what documents I did. So I had to redo it all.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
And then who knows how long they'll take to get back to you the second time. Like,
yeah,
if each response back to you is 5 to 10 days and they go back and forth 3 or 4 times, we're now looking at, 2 months before, you might have, or a month and a half before you get your final decision. So that part is a lot of paperwork. Yeah.
Yeah. So we got Sad Rashid. Sorry if I butchered your name. He asked, how are you recommending businesses best put the SEBA funds to use?
Yeah. So the way I'm advising it is to use it like a line of credit. So because it's interest free, you can just park it in your account and just sit on it. And the reason I say that is depending on your industry, depending on your business projections and business plan, you don't necessarily want to start spending money that you might not be sure you're going to be able to make from future revenues if things are still closed for the foreseeable future. Like even now, there's I think the talk of going to phase 3, which will open up more businesses, but phase 3, when it kind of appears, maybe to your wife's business being in that yoga space, you might not be at full capacity. I'm guessing probably not. So you want to kind of have that look ahead of like, I need to survive as long as possible. So sit on that money. Of course, if you have, bills outstanding, if you have things that need overdue and need to be paid, then looking after that is a good idea. But I'm not necessarily thinking like as a conservative person, just go and start spending it on, advertising or upgrades or something like that. I'm more of like a park it, let it be used like a line of credit. If you do tap into it, it's interest free. If it just sits there, it's interest free. And then, kind of dole it out as you kind of have a game plan for like, okay, I got this project I can do. I got to spend a little bit of money on some equipment or some tools or some materials to do it, but it's kind of a sure thing. The money's there. Okay, let's, get that contract signed and make it happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another question, when does it make sense for someone to incorporate their business?
Yeah, I mean, that's a general question, not specific to the COVID
Yeah.
situation, but the general answer I usually give people is there's about 2 or 3 or 4 requirements. The first one is if you're already running as a self-employed business owner and your business is going well, then you have nothing holding you back from incorporating. You literally incorporate and the next day you roll your self-employed business into your incorporated business and now you're running an incorporated business. The main reason you would do so, one, from being a tax point of view, is your business generates more money than you actually need from it for personal purposes. So your business is making, $90,000 a year net and your personal lifestyle needs $70,000 a year net. When you have that gap, the business now incorporating allows you to save up that additional money at corporate tax rates rather than personal tax rates, and you have a little bit more money left over and you're better off for, reinvesting in your business or saving up and things like that. That's one reason. The other reason is liability. So if you're in a business industry that has a highly, litigious environment where there can be lawsuits and people get upset, construction, I would say is highly in that area for sure, then incorporating.
No, nobody gets upset in construction.
Incorporating gives you this extra shield, and a lawyer can speak to it more than I can, but it just makes you in the business, if it's incorporated, separate. So if something goes wrong, it's the corporation's problem. I'm simplifying that. I'm not saying that's always the case, but it kind of separates you a little bit if you need that. That's the second reason. The third reason is,
I just wanted to add to that a little bit. It does separate you, but at the end of the day, anybody can sue anybody for anything. I've been in that case, like in that situation where they could say, yeah, I'm suing the company because you're whatever, this is what you did and I'm going to come after you. But then I'm going to also sue you because you own the company and you were doing this, right? So it does protect you, but will it hold up in court is always the question. But it's always interesting when you get lawyers involved.
Of course. No, and that's a great add-in, because it's not, you're not automatically, I think, incorporating means you do whatever you want and you're just going to walk away from the repercussions. So yeah, that's a good reminder that, we do have that issue. And on top of that, if you had like a person here from the insurance background, they'd mention, some insurance policies and products that would help as well. So that is important. And then the last reason was, if you're in some industries, the only way you can get some jobs and contracts is by having a corporation. They require that as like this is the only way you can bid on it. A good example of that is Ottawa is a big government town. And one of the ways that the government gives out work is through contractors. And what happens is the government issues a request for proposal. There's big recruiting companies in Ottawa that then bid and get the contract. And then that contract for maybe this project requires 40 people to help with this implementation. Those 40 people that are coming in, if that recruiting company requires it, have to be incorporated to be on that project as contractors. So now, if you're looking at a situation where I'm only going to get this work if I'm incorporated, it's a no-brainer that you would then, have a company if you want that work. And similarly, you might be applying for grants, and there's other subsidies and programs out there. I was involved in a couple last year for women in entrepreneurship. And one of the requirements was it's a woman-owned company. Well, as soon as it said that, we knew it was only companies that they're talking to, not self-employed people.
Mm. Right. And you're going on number 3 and number 4 before?
Yeah, so I would say those are the main gist of it. There's probably some smaller ones, but actually I'll speak to the other side as well. If you're not reaching that level of I'm making more money than I need from my business for personal purposes, and I don't have a big liability concern, and I don't need to incorporate to get this contract, I'm a big fan of staying self-employed until you hit that milestone, because you can incorporate at any time and roll that same business into a company. But if you're not there yet, then your situation stays a little bit simpler, because when you're self-employed, you're just adding that business activity to your personal tax return. You already have to file a personal tax return anyways as an individual. So there's a little bit more to it, but there's nothing extra in terms of return. Whereas if you incorporate, you have to first pay the incorporation fee, then you have to file annual corporate taxes. And if you don't like this company and don't need it, then you have to pay a dissolution fee to wrap it up and things like that. So you've gone down a path where there's stuff that might not be necessary. So I always kind of say, like, if you're starting up a business and you're not sure how it's going to go, start off self-employed, and then, every year or 6 months, we can reevaluate and then come up with that decision at some point down the road. And if you incorporate too late, no problem. You just paid a little bit of extra personal taxes, which is not the end of the world.
Right. So what do you see happening right now? To go back to the situation, the small businesses, obviously there's still a lot of businesses closed, but even the businesses that are open aren't operating the same. There's actually less revenue, added expenses because of the restrictions that are required, right? Kind of what are you seeing in terms of trends potentially, and what do you think is going to happen over the coming months? because there's obviously a lot of self-employed, a lot of small businesses out there right now, right? So there's a
Yeah.
lot of people that it's not easy.
No. It's definitely not easy. It's definitely challenging, very challenging, even for people that are able to, work from home, as they call it. You're hearing my kids in the background because I'm working from home. So obviously that's a new normal that we're getting used to. So it is challenging. So I'm going to break your question up into three categories because based on our clients, we're seeing three main trends. One is the people that are doing more or less the same. So there's some businesses that are just able to kind of chug along, and maybe they made some minor tweaks to, health and safety protocols, or maybe they used to work from home part-time, now they work from home full-time, but for the most part, they're still able to do the same things they used to, and they're still able to kind of make the same amount of money and maintain the same amount of expenses. So they're kind of status quo for the most part. So not much to kind of focus on there. Then there's a category of people that are like booming right now. We have a client that sells outdoor children's toys, and everyone wants, these outdoor play structures, because if you can't go to the park, well, we got to have a park in our backyard. Another one is pool companies. If you can't go out that much, well, having a pool sounds a lot more attractive. So I read an article that pool companies are booked solid for the rest of the season, and you're getting your pool in 2021 now if you order. So there are some people that are just, on the up and up. My landscaping company that's going to be doing our landscaping, they've been a little bit delayed because he's like, we started a bit late, but also everyone is in a rush to do stuff that they didn't do before because now they're just home all the time. So they're looking at their, project that they had their eye on partially, but now they're like sitting at home looking at it all day. So it's like that deck, that, that trees that I needed or whatever are just top of mind. So he's like, we're a lot busier than we've ever been. So that's the group that's booming. So if you're in one of those industries, or you're able to pivot, you're able to like become a pool installer or something like that, that might be an interesting opportunity to kind of tap into like that wave upwards, because it's creating that, if you're like making face masks, like my office is ordering face masks now. We're an accounting office, right? Like what would face masks you before 2020 have to do with accounting? But yeah, like, indoor face masks are becoming mandatory. So we should have, a big stockpile of face masks for our employees. So stuff like that is on the up and up. And then on the other side, yes, people that are closed, cannot operate fully, restaurants, retail, gyms, yoga studios, those businesses are hurting, and they're kind of in a panic mode. And if we had this conversation in April, it would be a lot more bleak. At the very least, we've now, I think from what I've read, we're getting close to phase 3, and phase 3, I think, is going to be everything reopening with the restrictions, except for maybe like sporting events and concerts. So everything will be open in some way, so people can kind of participate in something as far as being in a business goes. So they're kind of having to pivot and, figure out like, what more can we do to keep it going? Do we create an e-commerce platform to sell online? Do we offer virtual consultations? Do we take our personal training outside? One of the gym personal trainer clients I had told me he's now training people outside. And I thought, hey, that's cool. The weather's getting nice, it's summer, and maybe the rules aren't as strict for being outside as they are for being inside. So, flip some tires, do some stuff like that. By all means, go for it. So those are the categories, and it kind of depends on where you are. And are you able to flip your skill set to kind of tap into like the ones on the up and up? Because some people have that skill set where they're like, I could build a deck. Well, I'm like, hey, you could build a deck. That's good right now. If you can do childcare, think of all the people that need childcare come September, when schools are supposed to only be open 2 days a week, or you only go to school a couple days a week. Like kids that were previously not in childcare might need childcare. So that's going to be a booming industry for, at least the foreseeable future.
And now, what do you think is going to happen? So some of these businesses start to boom because everybody wants a pool. Like you said, everybody wants these toys, but then all of a sudden they don't want it anymore. They can't afford it, or what? Who knows what's going to happen, right? Like, do you think that those businesses will continue? Do you think that's going to be the new trend for the next couple of years? We definitely see more houses, for example, being sold in our area because I think people are coming out of the city, right? So, and you're in the same area too, right? So,
Yeah.
What do you think will happen there?
Yeah, I see that being a trend. I see that at least for the foreseeable future, because the people are talking about COVID and some levels of restrictions being in place for an indefinite period of time. And some of the restrictions, we don't have a clear timeline on when they'll come off. So I would imagine that yes, those restrictions, if you're going to be at home more, having a pool so you can keep your family busy is a good idea. So I think people that are in that space will continue to thrive for the foreseeable future. It's possible that, let's say things return to normal, if that ever happens, then those businesses might then return to their normal levels as well, which still might have been a good living. Maybe it's not booming, but these pool companies have been around for a while and they've, certainly made a go of it. And if you have this multidisciplinary skill set that you're kind of in this space where you can kind of shift gears, like you could do work on a deck in the summer and then work on something else if decks don't become that hot anymore. Well, that's easy to kind of shift over and take your skill set somewhere else. So I think people, if they can participate in something that's going well, should, and whatever skill sets they pick up along the way and have already will serve them well into the future regardless. And to your other point, yeah, if people, if the economy gets worse and people buy stuff they can't afford, then that's a different problem, and then there'll be other problems of affordability. But I feel like we're getting out of that stage of the closures. So like more people are now getting back to work, more people now are reopening. So hopefully the worst is behind them, and you can kind of look ahead and say like, yeah, I can afford a couple $1,000 play structure for my kids, and
Yeah.
that's something I want to get. By all means, let's do it.
Yeah, and I think another thing though we have to deal with though is the mindset, right? We've all created these unconscious habits now. Not everyone's going to necessarily want to go to uh, a, a gym right now, right? So just because they can open up doesn't mean everyone's going to flood back into that gym. Some people will, but there's probably going to be a lot of people who won't because they just don't want to be in that space because of their mindset and where they're at and whatever they feel, right? So there's a whole other thing, and obviously we can make all sorts of predictions. All we have to do is wait and see what actually happens, right? Um, Another question, there's one that just came up with regards to an errors and emissions insurance in the construction industry, or is it just liability? All these, when you were talking too, I wrote a note down that I need to get somebody in the insurance world on this because we could talk about all sorts of stuff. I know that from what I understand, and I'm definitely not an insurance broker by any means, but the insurance that we have is liability insurance. And errors and emissions is more for the design portion, right? So, and even, we had to deal with that at one point, and the liability insurance covered work that our subs did, but not, when I dug into it, it wouldn't cover work that we did, which I need to dig into some more, but it's kind of like, okay, well, what's the point then? Shouldn't we just sub everything out instead of doing our own work then? So that if something did go wrong, we have insurance for it. But I don't know. It's kind of an interesting conversation maybe for another time.
For sure, for sure. And I mean, insurance is a complex world in itself. And an example of that is when these closures happen, a lot of like one of the clients I have a lot of is dentists, and dentists kind of had like this big fight with their insurance companies saying like, hey, we've been forced to close down. What's business interruption insurance for if it isn't for closing down and not being able to work? And on one side, that's a good argument. On the other side, they said, well, pandemics aren't included in that coverage. It's more like, you had a fire and now you specifically cannot open up, but the other dentists can still open up. It's just you specifically had a fire. So they had this big back and forth of like, and a lot of it was public. There's a lot of articles in the Globe and Mail and other newspapers that kind of outlined their fight and how they kind of then started to get, sign this petition, and like 17,000 dentists have signed it. And I read an article that now the insurance company is revisiting their policy. So it's really hard.
So are they revisiting that? Because I had that same conversation, because that would basically go for gyms and yoga studios and everything else, right?
And to be perfectly upfront with you, it's very specific to that policy and that industry. So obviously,
Okay.
like I'll flip you that article afterwards that specifically talks about dentists and the main insurers, like in their industry, they happen to work with one primary insurer. So maybe that's in some ways good, in some ways that's bad, but then they have like a lot of like clout, if they're all kind of with one person, then they can kind of say like, well, hold on a second, we're all kind of in this together. You got to talk to us. Whereas I think in other industries, you're kind of all like, spread out over a lot of different people. So the specific article that I'm referencing and thinking of was they're all kind of mostly with Aviva. Aviva kind of then said to them, okay, we're going to revisit this and we'll let you know what, we can do for you. And which is a very broad statement, right? Like, you can appreciate that doesn't actually mean they're going to do anything, or it might mean they're going to do something, but it's kind of like, as far as publicity goes, they're going to revisit it and try to help them out. So by all means, whatever industry you're in, it's now, I think, way into the game now. If people haven't looked into it already, then, what have they been doing for the last 3 months? But, if they did look into it, that is something that hopefully they were able to get a clear answer on. If not, then, talking to an insurance broker, talking to like just these lobbying bodies for like, hey, what gives? There's some challenges in this space that make it really difficult for us. That's worth kind of exploring and then kind of figuring out best practices. Because in some cases, some of the coverages are optional, so sometimes someone might have said yes or no, and like you're just like flipping through the policy at the beginning and you're not, giving it the proper attention or knowing what each thing kind of means. And then obviously that makes a difference come claim time. So by all means, it's a very rough and general overview. I'm not an insurance.
No, we're actually with the Viva too, so I'd be interested in looking at that and
Sure.
checking it out and seeing because like things are changing. Like even now, we don't really know. We don't even know when phase 3 is going to be, right? And all of a sudden, the secret was extended last minute, right? Oh, you get an extra month, but an extra month still doesn't do anything for the people who still aren't open, right?
Yeah.
So yes, it helps, assuming the landlord's on board, but it's still not necessarily. It's everything's kind of a band-aid, right? To some extent. So I think I'm still of the mind, like as a business, you have to do everything you can to pivot. Things are not necessarily, if you were affected, because things are not going to go back to the way they were. There is going to be a change, a new normal, and there needs to be a change, right? So if you haven't, I think that comes back to the psychology that I mentioned, is that if you're just expecting things to go back to normal, you're kind of, in my opinion, just wishful thinking, right? It's not going to go back to normal. Things are going to change. Things have changed, and there's still so much uncertainty. We're still not sure what's happening, right? And then when schools open back up, who knows what's going to happen at that point, right? Your kid has a cough, and then it's like, well, he's sent home for 2 weeks. Well, what does that do for people, right? So that's a whole other.
Yeah. Kids get sick all the time in daycare. So yeah, I can appreciate that. And also we can just look, obviously the United States is in a different level than we are, but like some of the states specifically are reclosing after they had reopened. So if that's an indication of, as like you said, things reopen, things could close again. So as a business owner, I think it's important to consider your options, because whatever space you're in might close again. So are you able to kind of make that foolproof, have that, component of your business that can survive regardless of, that industry that you're in? Like I know some people, they started offering essential services in their business because they said like, this is the only way we can sell something. Like we're a retail store. Under the phase 1 rules, we can't stay open. But if we start offering some products that, now meet the phase 1 criteria, now we can. Like, an example of that would be like Dollarama. You would think like, is Dollarama really that essential? And they are, because they carry some of those products, but by being open, they got all the other products available for sale too.
Right.
Or like Costco, right? Like Costco, because I shop at Costco myself, you can still buy your pants and your oil and your, lights and all that other stuff. But mainly you would think it's the groceries that are the essential stuff. But by being open for that, you get to be open for everything else too. So,
Right.
that's
a good point.
So, yeah. So some of the retail owners I know, that's what they did. They're like, we're going to bring some, essential stuff in here. Like if you're in retail, can you start carrying masks? To me, that would be like a, great way to get people in the door, because everyone's looking for masks these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you have any final words of advice for, well, it could be on the personal side. We talked more about business, we didn't really get into the personal side of things. But yeah, do you have any advice, whether it's for people going through stuff on the personal side or businesses, even if they're maybe thinking of starting a business, right? Some of the greatest businesses in the world have always been started like in a depression or in a recession or something like that, right? So this is, to me, I always kind of look at the silver lining. I'm like, this is where times like these are where there's the greatest opportunity. You were just mentioning, like you mentioned, a dozen of opportunities for businesses and things that people could do if you're willing to put in the work and actually do it. Right. So, what do you have? What do you suggest, or what's some final words of advice?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of just doing a little bit of market research and figuring out where the opportunities are. Because the way I look at it, there are a lot of people out there that are making the same amount of money that they did before. You know, let's use a government employee as an example, or a teacher, or someone on a salary at a high tech company, and those companies are now just asking people to work from home. And now these people can't spend their disposable income like they used to. Maybe they used to go out for dinner twice a week, and that adds up to 8 times a month, and that adds up to like maybe $1,000. Every time they go out, it's like $120 or whatever. So there's still people out there with that same disposable income. They're just redirecting their funds. So how can you get in front of them and kind of take advantage of that? Like let's use the food as an example. One restaurateur, chef person that I know, what they thought would be interesting is, well, if you can't come in for a meal in a restaurant, I'll put together the food for you in a kit that you would get in a restaurant. We'll have, 6 or 8 people that sign up and get these kits delivered. And then at 5 o'clock, you jump on a Zoom call. I show you how to prepare it and plate it and get it all ready so that at 5:30, you've now experienced a semi cooking class, semi fancy high end meal that you would have gotten in a restaurant. And I've now sold you the ingredients and the teaching and all that as an experience. So now, and they were able to charge a ton of money for that.
Nice.
Like that person that had $1,000 a month dining out budget is now looking for places to kind of redirect that money to. So they get this opportunity, and they're like, yeah, that sounds cool. I need something to do, and I want good food, and I don't know how to cook, and blah blah blah. So it's really just kind of figuring out where can I reposition myself in that ecosystem. And no matter what you do, there are, I think, things that either you could change to do, or there might be some training and education that you could add on. Because I'm talking to so many people these days, and because they have extra time, all they're doing is webinars, courses towards their MBA, extra this, extra that, certifications. So, if you have that time, and a lot of these organizations are offering courses online, jump on it, and get that extra little degree or that education or credentials in your belt. And then you can just add that to your overall repertoire. And that's, I think, working well for some people.
Yeah. Love it. Sarwar, always full of amazing ideas. Now everyone can see why I bug you so much.
It's all good.
What's the best way? You have a couple things. What else do you want to share? You have your beyond networking stuff that you do as well. I don't know if you want to share that, or the best way for people to get a hold of you.
Sure. So beyond networking, Casey's a part of that group. It's basically, prior to the pandemic, we had started a group that tried to do team building activities that wasn't specific to one organization. So it was just team building across anyone and everyone. So, the typical things that are team building are mini golf, the bowling alley, horseback riding, paintball, anything you can think of. And we would just go out and do it as a group of people that want to just get to know each other better. And we made them family friendly as well in some cases. So, if you want to bring your kids to a pool party at some person I know in Stittsville has a big house and a big pool, then by all means, let's get 50 people together and have a pool party. So that's on hold at the moment, obviously with the pandemic and everything. It's not that easy to do, but there is hope. There is light. People are golfing now. People are doing some other stuff right now. So, maybe when we hit phase 3, I'll feel comfortable enough to go to the driving range and kind of get back out there a little bit more. So stay tuned for that. We have a Facebook page. And if people reach out to me, we have a mailing list. And in the meantime, because we're not able to do those events, we've started a webinar series kind of similar to what you're doing, where we're just interviewing people to kind of ask them, how has the pandemic impacted you? What do you foresee the future looking like? What tips do you have for other people? So, we kind of had a dentist on episode 1, and then we had, I think, Casey, Genevieve, she was one of our guests. Talking a little bit about Airbnb. We had, what do we have this week? We have 2 people that have a background in basketball. So, sports is kind of on the back burner right now, but people still miss sports. So 2 people with a basketball background, just talking a little bit about sports and reminiscing and talking about, how can we stay involved with that. So we call that 2020 and beyond. And just, it's a webinar series on Thursdays that we have that, I'll share the link with you, and we can get some people into that if they like.
Sure, we'll post it. We'll post it in the description, and then when we send it out as well. Funny enough about basketball is when I posted that we were having you on TCB Live, my sister wrote, that guy definitely reffed me a million times, right? Because she played for Algonquin for 4 years. So
I didn't even know you had a sister, more or less, that I refereed her. So that's that's the small world that it.
Yeah, 4 brothers and 2 sisters, but they're all half. So my younger sister is a big basketball player and very good. She's actually just moved out east recently, but yes, you've apparently reffed her plenty of times.
Small world.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sarwar. It's always amazing. We'll share all these links. If anybody has any questions, please post them even after the people who are watching the replay or listening to the replay. Send us your messages, comments. We'll get them out there. Sarwar has like the biggest heart ever and just full of knowledge and wants to help, right? So if you're a small business, if you're dealing with anything, managing the financial side, I definitely recommend that you reach out to Sarwar. He helped us figure out a mess of stuff that somebody else had created in the past, and it was all solved and resolved, and it was worked out better than we had anticipated. So, Sarwar, thanks again for that, and it's been fun. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Casey. Talk to you soon.